Welcome back to another exciting episode of Aaron's Opinion, the podcast for blind people where we talk about critical issues in the blindness community. I'm Aaron Richmond. This episode, like all others, is copywritten by me, Aaron Richmond, and Aaron's Opinion. Thank you. And this episode can be heard, of course, right here on YouTube, where most of you watch, along with, if you want to listen to us on iTunes, we're there, along with many other places that you can hear podcasts. All right? Well, let's get into it. As we say, as they say, let us take a walk down the moonlit trail and down memory lane. And I mean that very literally, because really, do you remember a couple months ago when I interviewed people from Splice Studios, and
Yes.
we talked about, yeah, yes, actually, yes, exactly. Well, as a matter of fact, glad that you listened to that one and you remember. Well, tonight we're doing something similar. In my when I was going through Facebook, I received a post from a podcast that I had not heard of, and I'm so glad I have. Dread of Night Radio Theater is basically a podcast that produces scary content, but in much longer, much more well written. Not much more, well written, not that at all, but equally as well written. But what I meant, sorry for that, but what I
That's
meant is,
understand.
because you have to phrase things in a very specific way when it's hard to compare, but much longer than other scary content. Anyway, I reached out to them, and Scott Weitz has been nice enough to join us on the podcast this evening, and he was telling me over the phone that it's been quite a journey just to produce the opening episode. Cabinet, I believe,
Mhm.
definitely really, really, really well done. So why don't you take a few minutes, or take it really as long as you want, to introduce yourself to my audience and kind of walk me through how you got into the mess of podcasting and how this whole notion came about in the first place. Go ahead.
Well, I am Scott Weitz. I'm the creator of the show Dread of Night Radio Theater. It's a new horror audio drama series that I've launched actually on Halloween of this year. It's been I'm a show writer in entertainment. I've worked in themed entertainment, theme parks, and worked on many years worth of haunted attractions. And one of the projects that I've long wanted to create and never had the time with other work happening is to make a modern recreation of the classic horror suspense audio dramas of the 1930s and 40s into the 50s, like Inner Sanctum, Suspense, Lights Out was a big influence. And I was always captured as a kid by the theater of the mind that these shows employed. Certainly, Orson Welles' Mercury Theater show of War of the Worlds was hugely influential on our show as well. And I finally, now with amongst everything else, COVID happening and more, I finally found the time to launch Dread of Night and create this first premiere episode, the Cabinet, which really harkens back to my love of those shows, and yet is certainly a creation of the podcast era. The sound engineering we can do now, and I can literally mix the show at home. You don't need entire radio networks to produce these things anymore. So I created Dread of Night and launched it with this episode, which is, in short, without spoiling the story, the Cabinet is about a woman, Laura, out with her friends on her birthday, and she volunteers to appear in a stage magician's act, who does the disappearing cabinet trick. And what ensues once that illusion begins is the crux of the story, and it explores an unseen side of such magic illusions that most audiences never see, and indeed most magicians never complete. So it's definitely a tale of mystery and indeed horror of what goes on with Laura and what she finds in this other realm. And it's now started that dream project of mine to get a horror audio drama series of this generation rolling, and I hope to do much more.
It's really good. So, yeah, I guess in the humor of Halloween, I guess to provide some action-packed commentary for the episode. Well, the trick definitely worked. The only problem is she didn't get back. It definitely the cabinet worked for the disappearing part, but as far as the reappearing, well, that didn't seem to go so well. And where does that whole story come from? I mean, you mentioned who wrote that story, but where do you think the original story of the concept of the cabinet and then obviously things go awry? Where do you think that comes from?
It's one of the things that why I picked this episode about a magician and a magic act is it's rather fascinating about the history of magic and illusions that many stage illusions and tricks go back centuries, if not thousands of years. The cup and the balls trick is incredibly old, dates back to Egypt and really ancient eras, and because stage magic as a performance art is so secretive, one of the aspects of it is it's not well documented. Magicians share tricks with each other, but they don't. It in effect ruins the illusion if you have the entire history of a magical performance set out before you. It becomes a real thing, and it spoils the illusion that makes such magic acts work. And even though I was doing it in audio only, everyone understands the concept of the disappearing cabinet. A volunteer gets in the cabinet, the magician does his magical stick, and opens the door, and the person is no longer in the cabinet. And of course, the trick classically reverses itself to bring back that volunteer from wherever they go back to the stage in the theater where it's performed. And I liked the idea that the magician in our show, Dante, is a rather run-of-the-mill stage magician. He's an older man. He comes from a different era where stage magic was a much bigger draw than it is today. And he knows his act, but he plays very much on the fact that his job as a stage magician, although he pretends to be this powerful, arcane, wizard in his act. And I wanted this episode to also explore the concept of where does fake stage magic end and the possibility of real magic beginning. And what if a person who is a magician as their lifelong career doesn't always know the difference, isn't always in control of where that line extends, even in his own act? Does he know? He knows the mechanics of his illusions, but should something else happen beyond his control, how does he react to that? And indeed, what responsibility would a magician have if, let's say, they brought a volunteer on stage and put them in the disappearing cabinet, did their spiel, opened the door, and they were gone, but they were actually gone. Does that magician know how to get them back? Does that magician know where they sent that person? I wanted to explore that imaginative concept of the mystery part of magic, how audiences, much like our show, meet the performer more than halfway to create the reality of what's happening for everyone in the room. And what happens if the reality of that situation is they lose control of that? And I thought that was, it's similar to a lot of shows like Twilight Zone and Alfred Hitchcock Mysteries and things where you have supernatural events, you have mysterious events that break our daily reality in one small way, and how that one small break can throw everything off because we lose our control over, I know how to handle the daily world, and this is how the laws of physics work in my world. I know that people don't suddenly fly through the air. So what happens when everyone agrees that this magician is doing this act on stage, and even the audience probably guesses how it works, and then something goes wrong. How do people handle that break in their reality? And that's a larger theme that Dread of Night will explore across future episodes.
I'm glad you brought it up, because I had never given any thought to that. Actually, ironically, when I was listening, I had never given any thought to the fact that what if this type. I mean, usually I do the what ifs a lot of times in life, but in this episode, I didn't. In your episode, I didn't think what if. All I thought was, I certainly hope that never happens in real life, because that magician wouldn't have a career anymore. That would be the end of the hotel. Everybody go home. Bye. You know, that would be the end of that. But what you touched on was something it's an absolutely, even from, I mean, you really liked Cave. I mean, even from a philosophical point, what you just said with this notion of losing control, this whole energy of like losing, like losing our grip, losing the reins, losing the grip on life.
Mm-hmm.
That whole notion, I completely agree with you now. Didn't occur to me as the listener when I was listening to the first, through the first, the first play of it. But that is a really fascinating idea. So you've done a lot of, you've done a lot of work in entertainment. So are you a magician?
No, I lack the performance genes. I'm not an actor. I do most of my creating with writing, and I mean, you could make a loose parallel to a stage magician performing and creating an episode, a storytelling adventure like this, where a stage magician is very much a performer, and their entire act depends on controlling the audience. You control what they see. You control what you show them. You control what you think, what they think you show them, in order to make their illusions work. And I think I wouldn't say it's more prevalent in audio drama than filmmaking or writing a novel or whatever, but your job is to capture the audience, and especially with something that's horror related like this, that it has an expanded view of reality. It's heightened reality. It's not real reality, but I need to capture the audience and deliver the cabinet to them in a way where I'm controlling their perception of reality within this box. And so it's much less a stage acting performance than it is a storytelling performance. But if you've seen one of the great stage magicians that I was a big fan of is oh God, now I just dropped his name. Ricky Jay. I don't know if you are familiar with Ricky Jay's work. He was very good with cards, but he did a masterful stage performance. It was written by David Mamet. And in effect, his entire act was storytelling. He did a trick, a classic trick that magicians have done for hundreds of years, where a magician manipulates the four queens in a card deck to constantly appear and disappear from where the audience thinks they will be. But the trick is told as a narrative, is written by a playwright as a story, and he makes the queens characters, and it not only makes a standard table card trick more interesting, but it does add some drama to it, in that he makes the audience believe that you think what he's about to do is impossible. And that works in two ways. And that one, it's the drama of fear that what if a magician fails? What if he blows the trick? You're not supposed to do that. That's horrible. That would be a very memorable moment in a magic act. But the flip side of that is, if he succeeds, it seems to be impossible to me. How did he do it? And the storytelling illusions that I create in an episode like this for Dread of Night is to entice people into a reality that seems like theirs, and make that one break that changes the story to where they're sitting and they're hearing a real world around them. They imagine, they build the world in their heads, and then something goes wrong that doesn't happen in our normal lives. How does the audience respond to that, let alone how do the characters respond to it? And so that's not very close to being a stage magician, but it's in the end, it's storytelling, and the better you tell it, the more effective it is.
Excellent. No, exactly. I think there's a lot of similarity between a performance that we would see on a stage, whether it's in Las Vegas or even this type of thing where it's like a YouTube show, but still, this is some sort of a performance. Obviously, I'm not a magician either, so there's no magic. But it does seem, especially if you are not a content creator, I'm sure that YouTube does seem magical. It seems like videos just keep popping up and content keeps on appearing when in fact, well, you have to organize what you want to do. You have to call your guests. You have to plan it all out. So it kind of is rehearsed, and it kind of is a story that I've already thought of in my mind. Well, I think that your episode in particular, and one of the things that really struck me about it is, for blind people, I can tell you, and I'm very open to talking about this, is that blind people find this to be very, very attractive. This whole notion of just focusing on a podcast that's just purely based on sound. Now, all podcasts are audio, but yours is even more audio because it's not really factual story. You've just basically you're painting an audio picture. And I
Mhm.
can tell you that it's extremely attractive to, at least to me as a blind person, and most of my audience would probably agree. Did you think, have you thought of that, how this would be very beneficial to people, who are blind and in the disability community?
I have in an indirect way, based on a personal experience with a family member. My grandmother passed away several years ago, but
I'm
she lived
sorry
till
to hear that.
thank you. She lived till 98 and a half. She
Oh,
lived a
wow.
very full life, was very active, um, loved traveling. She and her brother went on a cruise to the Amazon when they were in their 80s. Gives you an idea of how actively she lived her life. She was an avid reader, loved watching the Dodgers on TV, a lot of things. She would socialize with her church group. And in the last few years of her life, she became significantly vision impaired. She wasn't able to read books anymore, which is one of her favorite things.
Yeah.
She and her brother invented, exchanging book clubs 40 years before most people thought of it, because they would each recommend books to each other and share them back and forth, and then discuss the books once they both read them. So losing her sight was a particular hardship for her, in that she was so used to being independent. She still remained independent the rest of her life, with some help, but she enjoyed exploring the world in a lot of different ways that her loss of her sight obviously impinged upon, to the point where she couldn't function, and her advancing age made it harder to travel, etc.
Sure, sure.
But so in trying to help her out, most of my family is gone, and she outlived almost all of them. And so trying to help her, I got her into books on CD, of course, which is a great way that she could continue enjoying her favorite authors as they wrote new books without having to read them. She would sit and listen to them, and enjoyed that when she got used to that format, and being, in her 90s, in the 2000s, learning how to operate her CD player and things like that. But she quickly caught on, and because she was motivated to hear the books. So I got very involved in, finding, going to libraries, buying her books on CD for her birthday and Christmas of her favorite authors. And she kept devouring that content faster than her authors could write new books, of course, because it's, you can listen to a novel in, 10, 13 hours, whatever it is. And authors can't write that fast. Even her favorite ones, who would, I noticed as she got deeper into the libraries of her favorite authors, many of her authors' books got thinner and thinner because they just wanted to churn out more of them faster. So I worked with her on finding new authors based on the authors she liked, exploring, nonfiction books about travel and things, so she could get that sense of travelogue like she used to enjoy. And so that the importance of that in her life just educated me secondhand on the power of how audio entertainment can enhance a person's life, whether they're sighted or not. But certainly if they're not, it kept her mind active for many years after she couldn't read books physically, because it kept her thinking. It kept her thinking about, how this novel by this author was similar to a previous one she read. So it was hugely important to her, as long as she could keep up with it. And it was important to me to help her out. And I've certainly enjoyed novels, readings on CD and audio dramas from other people. So it's long been an interest of mine since I first heard one of my first classic horror audio dramas that was, broadcast in 1937. I happened to stumble upon it one night as a kid and was freaked out by how well it was done, even though I knew it was a radio play. So I've always been in tune with that, and at least with the experience of my grandmother, how effective and how helpful and enjoyable audio entertainment can be to people who are sight impaired. And I've seen it work firsthand, and so I can understand with only secondhand knowledge what that must, how important that can be to other people.
So good. Yeah, and that story is, very familiar to me in the blindness community. As a blind person, that story is very familiar. Many people like her, become elderly and lose their vision and go through that. It's so good that she was able to appreciate, books on tape and the audio CDs, which I'm only 29 years old. So the audio CDs even seem old, even to me now, with how far things have gotten. I tell people I really noticed a change in our society around 2006. I think is where I started to notice the difference in the technology, and things were really, really picking up by that year. But I remember those CDs. They were good. Now we just have, Audible and other ways of accessing the same material. But as a blind person, it was very noticeable that your content was perfect. That episode was perfectly written. Now the other question, to which there are many, is, okay, so if you're as the writer, by the way, how do you go about choosing your cast and the different, voice actors and actresses that you want to include in this particular episode? How, who are they? By the way, they're all welcome to individually guest here on this podcast.
Certainly.
If you want. So if you want to talk about, maybe some of them, if you want,
sure.
How you found them, the story of picking a cast.
I'm very fortunate. I live in Southern California, and so I'm surrounded by a lot of acting and performance talent in general. And then amongst my friends and associates, projects I've worked on, I know people through them. I think our two most well-known cast members. The first would be Kirk Thatcher, who was he won an Emmy for Muppets Tonight. He's done tremendous amount of work with the Henson organization. He directed Jim Henson's Turkey Hollow. He's an actor. He was, I don't know if you are familiar with Star Trek IV, but Kirk was the punk rocker on the bus who Spock nerve pinched in Star Trek IV. So a talented man with a very long career and an excellent actor. I was fortunate that he, unbeknownst to me when I asked him, had a lifelong dream of wanting to be a horror host. And so getting cast as Mr. Trumbull, the host of Dread of Night, was, he snapped up the opportunity very quickly because it fulfilled one goal that he'd always wanted to have that had eluded him. And he also plays Dante the Magician in this episode of The Cabinet. And we also have Pruitt Taylor Vince, a very prolific actor, another Emmy winner. He's been in Stranger Things, JFK, X-Files, True Blood. He was in The Walking Dead. He was in Deadwood. He was in Nobody's Perfect with Paul Newman. So extremely talented and prolific, successful actor who I first met on the previous podcast that I was a part of called Damn Dirty Geeks. That was a show founded by another cast member of our show, Frank Dietz, who is a filmmaker. He's a writer. He has an episode of Greg Nicotero's Creep Show coming up next year. And he created a podcast out of a ritual that we used to go to Frank's house, drink some wine or whatever, and talk about our favorite movies, a lot of genre movies, horror, science fiction, classic movies. And the circle of people who participated in that expanded, and Frank started the Damn Dirty Geeks podcast. And one of the many guests we had on the show was Pruitt Taylor Vince and also Jennifer Lynn Warren, who is also in the cabinet. And so it's just an expanding circle of friends who all have the same interests in filmmaking and storytelling and performance and acting. And I, through all these friends and connections, just started asking people in those circles, I'm building this show. Would you like to be part of the ensemble cast? And it's always been my intention for Dread of Night to have an ensemble cast where, when they're available, actors can rotate through roles, take on different parts and different stories, and they get to exercise their own creative joys in creating different characters in different situations. So we have Liesl Hansen, who plays Laura, the lead in our show. She is another prolific young actress. And Jennifer Lynn Warren, who I mentioned, who plays the other female lead. She was the Whisperer, if you've heard the episode. And also have Trish Geiger, who is one of our Damn Dirty Geeks podcast. She's an actress and filmmaker. And Rico Anderson, who is also a very busy actor in TV series like The SWAT and Orville and The Rookie. So I'm blessed with a wealth of choices of truly talented, busy working actors in the industry who share in common my love of this type of entertainment. And I hope, as you know, our first season goes into production next year, to expand on that cast of actors, finding new actors to join the group. And it's, you know, really, the cast is so good, it's up to me not to screw it up in the writing, so, because I don't have to worry about their performances at all. They're all very talented, and I love working with all of them on the cabinet, because they got the idea of what I was doing with Dread of Night, and it's interest that they shared as well. So it's, you know, it's that kind of perfect storm of the right people, the right time. And if now that we've produced this sort of proof of concept premiere episode, I have no doubt of that the more ambitious stories we can write in the first season, obviously the actors will easily live up to it and surpass expectations with any challenge I give them now. So that's a very good place for me to be as a creator.
Definitely, yes. Well, all of if any of those actors, if any of them want to come to this podcast and record an episode, they are all welcome. That is all a very interesting group for sure. The only TV show you mentioned in that whole response that I've seen is, of course, the Orville, I believe. Mm-hmm. So that I've seen. Now, that particular person, I don't remember what character they played in the Orville, but I definitely remember the Orville was incredibly creative, by the way. Speaking of creative, wow, perfect, another perfect one. Very, very, very creative, incredibly creative, and very connected to society. That one was, yeah. Well, sure.
I was gonna say, I think Orville is another good example of, you know, a creator taking an idea that is incredibly well established in our popular culture entertainment, you know, looking back on Star Trek and such shows that, you know, literally date back 50 years or more, and changing up the motivations and the concept around a basic idea and creating a new storytelling platform out of that isn't just leaning on the history of Star Trek's popularity, but indeed, making its own way and telling stories in an entirely different way that Star Trek, even if you did them in a new Star Trek film today or something, it wouldn't work because it's not Star Trek. It's its own entity, and it lives in its own reality, and therefore, its storytelling limits are endless because it's established its own rules now, and can then tell stories within that universe that completely make sense and are fresh and new because they haven't been told that way before. And I think that's another example of where mass market entertainment is right now. Is it's becoming much more individualized and much more independent in its approach, that so many shows like that are very well received because it's speaking with an entirely new voice.
Definitely. Yeah. Okay. So then how exactly do you go about writing the script? Do you already have some ideas in your mind? Did you have a lot of ideas in your mind from this episode or for this episode? Did you base it off a story that you had already heard, or did you just kind of let your creativity and the imagination go for it and just say, okay, here's the image I want to paint. What do we have to say to get that image? How does the actual script writing come across, do you think?
In this particular case, The Cabinet was the third script that I wrote for Dread of Night as I was developing the show over the past couple of years. I had an original story that was going to be the premiere episode, and after developing it a while and beginning to think about casting, I came up with another idea that better suited the cast that I was talking to. I wrote up that episode, and unfortunately, one of the main actresses that I had set for that role became unavailable. Fortunately, she did work on a TV series, and so wanting her to keep that role for her, I put that episode aside. And the Cabinet was an idea that I had rattling around in my notes for development, and the more I thought of this story of the woman volunteering for the Magic Act and what happens if that goes wrong, the more that idea appealed to me as a better introduction to Dread of Night as a series. The story really encompasses on a small scale what I want to do with Dread of Night at a larger scale of storytelling. And so the idea it was the base concept of doing a story about a magician's act had been rattling in my head for a while. But when I decided to develop it for this show, it actually, I wrote it very quickly. I did a few drafts on changing things, but the core story and the storytelling of it really hasn't changed from the first inception. And it was a slightly more compact story. It had fewer characters, and I thought that it would, production-wise, it would be an easier episode to produce, but yet not skimp on storytelling at all, because you got very involved with this main character who you followed through the entire episode. And it just the clarity of that and the immediacy of drama of what happens to Laura as she goes on this bizarre adventure, I knew would be something that audiences could hopefully identify with and sympathize with her. Absolutely. And urge her to get out of the situation she finds herself in, which she is, in that sense, she's taking the place of the audience. She doesn't know what's happening, and we don't know what's happening. So therefore, we're tied to her. We hope that she figures out of it so that we can get out of wherever we are at the same time. And I thought that just everything clicked in writing this episode, and the casting for it went very quickly, and the production of it, other than being interrupted by COVID for 6 months, the production also went very smoothly. So, so far the reaction is very good, and I believe it's successful in what I wanted the Cabinet to do. And I think it sets the stage for the rest of the series coming up.
Oh, definitely. Yeah, and as the listener, of course I sympathize with Laura stuck in this other dimension I would call it, but then
Mhm.
I would call it, but then at the same time, I'm a very unusual person myself. I'm a little odd. So, of course, I had to think, well, what else is in this dimension? So it kind of sparked my curiosity too. Well, if we're in this dimension, what else is going on? Who are or what are those little creatures that were
Mhm.
harassing her? Those little bat-like things that you created there. Those little bats is what I would call them. Some sort of a
Yes.
vampire-like, creepy vampire bat thing-ish, bat-like thing,
Right.
I guess. Right. That's how I guess pictured it in my mind. That's
Mhm.
what you are conveying by that image, even of that creature. It's a bat of some sort, is what I was thinking.
Mhm.
But yeah, that was a very incredibly interesting. So you said you've done a lot of other work in the past that has kind of all led up to this. So what other things have you written? What other projects have you worked on? Other shows and things like that?
Um, I've worked mainly for the past decade or so in themed entertainment in theme park shows. I worked for a local company here as a theme park entertainment producer. We did a lot of live shows and attractions in theme parks in China, around the world. Obviously, the market for that has sort of disappeared in the last year, unfortunately. And I know it will recover, but it's just very hard to do anything in the theme park industry right now. Um, but I did have a tremendous amount of experience creating uh, haunted attractions for uh, local fundraising groups, professional haunted attractions, walk-through attractions. The probably the biggest one I did was I was brought on by producers and the filmmaker Eli Roth, who wanted to create a haunted attraction in Las Vegas on the Strip, which we did in 2012, and it was budgeted $10 million or so. So I had a lot of production room with the co-creator Keith Kaminsky, who designed the entire show, of really going all out on a haunted walkthrough attraction on a big scale. And my interests have always involved horror and supernatural storytelling, science fiction. So getting to work in that area of building shows that are storytelling, they're illusion, they are interactive, they're immersive. That has always interested me the most, and indeed most of my show writing experience relates to attractions and personal entertainment ventures, just because that holds my interest the most. And uh, for many years, certainly, it was the area that I got the most work in because of my experience in doing that.
Sure, sure. Yeah, that's extremely interesting. It's a really good genre, for sure. Have there ever been, other genres that you've dabbled in at all?
Um, yeah, well, uh, yes, sort of. I mean, and not in a greatly uh, productive way of where I spent a lot of time doing it. I wrote some spec episodes for TV series, um, and while well reviewed, none of them ever got produced because it's an incredibly competitive field uh, at its height, certainly. And I always came back to projects to where a live entertainment experience was involved with the audience versus writing a script for a sitcom that someone might produce if it's chosen, and they go film the episode and it shows up on TV. I just never enjoyed that aspect of writing as much as writing for entertainment where I could watch the audience experience it and I could share that experience with them. That always interests me more. And so the ventures I would take out of that were fairly short-lived and not particularly productive, just because that wasn't where my heart was as a creator.
Sure, sure. Yeah, and I think both from my perspective as a content creator and then of course a content consumer, believe me when I tell you I'm just as addicted to listening to everybody else's podcast as I am with thinking about my next episode for
Hmm.
myself. I'm suspicious, and I want to know your feedback about it, but I'm suspicious that podcasting kind of will become the next version of TV. I'm certainly not saying that TV is going anywhere. It certainly is not, but I think that podcasting is going to really take over a lot of our lives and a lot of the content that will be consumed. What's your perception of that, and what have you found about that?
I totally agree. I think one of the reasons why I geared up production and creation of Dread of Night is the timing of it, because in the recent years and currently, I think two key things happened: the rise of podcasting and YouTube content, with people making videos. It's basically the democratization of entertainment production. You can create your own podcast show and have guests on it, and they appear online like we're doing now. And there are no barriers to creating the show. There are no barriers to producing it. There are no barriers to distributing it, because an industry has evolved to support that kind of personalized individual entertainment, where we no longer have to, it's completely flipped the script, especially with COVID going on. Of now, major Hollywood studios are saying, we're going to release the new Wonder Woman in December on video on demand, with a small release simultaneously in theaters for those who still want to dare going to theaters. But it's the instead of the audience waiting for producers to hand down entertainment, people are creating their own. And I think that is the consumption of that has become even more, not only popular but necessary in a way, with the COVID pandemic, that people were so, especially in the beginning, when we didn't have months of experience with the pandemic lockdown, of people not going out of their houses, and they're any entertainment they're getting, they're piping into their own homes from all of these independent producers like yourself. And one of the things that I noticed, and you bring up an excellent point about how podcasting is not only creating its genre but evolving, is it was good timing to launch Dread of Night, because a mass audience has trained itself to listen to entertainment again, not sit down in front of the TV and watch a sitcom and then the next sitcom and then the next sitcom. The audience became very selective, and a audio entertainment environment grew around that to say, oh, you like audio dramas? We produce these for you. You want podcasting on topics of the day? We have 11 choices that you can download into your phone and listen to those. And the audience that had been so visually keyed on special effects movies and television, where the medium was so visual, even YouTube, that still all exists, but the audience that had little knowledge of the radio era of entertainment before television, where families literally sat down around their radios and listened to news, listened to entertainment, listened to whatever. They were trained to process information rapidly and successfully through their ears. And the generation of podcasters and podcast listeners, books on, streaming books on tape and whatever, the audience has relearned those skills again. I can produce an episode of Dread Night Radio, and people will listen to it for 29 minutes because they're used to listening to books that take 12 hours to listen to, or a 2-hour podcast or whatever. So I think it's how the medium has changed, how distribution has freed up all of us to create our own content. And literally, I can upload an episode of Dread Night. You can upload an episode of your podcast. People can listen to it. They can watch it on YouTube. And basically, all they need is the access to the simplest connection to the internet to choose from and enjoy almost limitless content that is tuned to their specific interests, because they are the ones choosing each particular piece of entertainment. And it's a bit revolutionary. And I would say that movement, whether it's podcast or something else, can only expand in how people produce their own content, distribute it, and how other people enjoy it on a very individual level, because that's just how the technological trend goes. When TV became popular in the 50s, movie producers and studios were terrified because people were staying home. They weren't watching movies in theaters. They would not go out to see a movie. So they made spectacular movies that you could only appreciate in the theater. But we're through YouTube and podcasting, everyone has become their own mini studio, their own mini producer. And it's the kind of event that happens in a culture that it doesn't end. It's not a fad. This is now a trend that will evolve in its own direction based on how producers like you decide where it wants to go. You can influence the future of podcasting simply based on what kind of podcast you want to produce. And the freedom to do that and the ability to reach untold numbers of people literally around the world, that has never happened before. And I can only say it's going to get better in a lot of ways through technology and media that we can't imagine right now. But given the pace of how technology advances, it's only going to happen sooner and faster, because that is the trend of digital technology.
You're absolutely. I completely agree. It's really, really fascinating. Yeah, I mean, we have people listening to this podcast from countries that I don't actually know anyone in. I don't know anyone in Singapore.
Mm-hmm.
Who are you? I don't know anyone in Turkey. Actually, I kind of do through one of my guests, so I do know who that person probably is. But I don't know anyone in Russia. Who are these people? It's really,
absolutely,
it's really inspirational, even to me as my own creator, as my own creations. It's really entertaining. It's a form of entertainment and inspiration for me, just to be able to produce stuff that the whole world is listening to and enjoying. So, magicians like Dante or whatever their names are around the magical magician community never tell us their tricks. They never tell us how they do the tricks. But what are some of your ideas? Just give our listeners a kind of whet our appetite for what you might be thinking of for the future, for some future episodes. What topics do you have? What do you think?
One of what I hope to do with Dread of Night is to explore a lot of different stories, a lot of different types of stories. I have an idea. I still have the 2 unproduced scripts that I'd written before. They tell similar scale stories, but very different contexts. One of my main ambitions, I'll be in the near future, I'll be starting a Kickstarter to help crowdfund the production of these first season episodes. But one of my main goals is to produce a story that is recorded in binaural audio. I don't know if you're familiar with that. It's basically 3D audio. The microphone is a head with ears in it. And instead of recording at a microphone that is in front of your mouth, the actors record in space around the listener's head, which is the microphone. So that if you're listening through earphones, you actually hear whatever's happening in a 3D audio field around your head. It's incredibly immersive.
I've heard that before. I've heard it before. It's really, that is really, really, really good. That can be really good, especially for blind people. But then, of course, that can also get distracting too, because then you get all thrown off by the environment of the sound, and then you kind of forget where the story went. So It has to be. The trick with that is, just like anything else, it has to be just right. It has to be just the right amount of that mixing, and just the right just the right feel of it. Yeah, I've heard it. It's really cool though. Yeah.
Yeah, it's in the past. I long ago I produced a 3D audio show for an attraction in Japan, and it was based on the story of a prison escape, and the audience, the producers, I wrote the show, but with guidance from the owners and producers, and it had a lot of the standard, more gimmicky effects of, you hear a rat, nibbling at your ear on your shoulder or whatever. A lot of the demos for it have, like hearing someone cut your hair, which is, it has a novelty factor in that, you're sitting there, no one is cutting your hair, but your ears are telling you, because this sounds in the right proximity, that someone is actually cutting your hair. It's the dichotomy of what you're seeing, what you're knowing is your reality, and what you're hearing is different. And the story that I intend to use this production technique for is a dramatization of a scene of one of horror literature's classics, but it's a very small part of a novel, and I wanted to expand out the dramatic potential of that story that you only hear the highlights of. And you're absolutely right. The trick to using binaural audio is to not get caught up in the gimmick of it, but to use it as an immersive environment, that in a way that just regular stereo audio, even as well produced as it can be, just can't replicate. You don't get a sense of direction. You get a sense of side, and you can pan things to where a listener hears a sound moving in their head, but it's usually on one plane, left or right. And so I think this story is particularly suited to having a small group of characters in a finite, contained location, and you drop in an element of danger and suspense within these unsuspecting people, and then watch the drama of survival play out in that group. And I think it's particularly well suited to binaural audio, because it would, I'll give you a hint, it would take place on a ship. So it's in the middle of the ocean. You get a lot of environment around it, but you also get a sense of, now you're going into a cabin in the ship. It's a very close area. So you can play up sense of claustrophobia, or being trapped with someone in an environment where you cannot, jump off the ship and run away to safety. There's nowhere to go. So that is one of the, it is specifically for that one story, because unfortunately, it would be a very expensive production cost to record the entire show that way. But I have plenty of other episodes and scripts I'm developing that can relate to kind of 80s gory horror movies, or it can be a tale that is mostly about suspense. So I will try to change the tone and the feel of these stories individually, so that the audience can experience a broader range rather than hitting the same note with every single episode.
Yeah, that's really good. I could definitely imagine in my mind's ear the binaural audio working really well with like a nature scene, or like in the rainforest or something like that, where you're like on like a tour, like a nature safari tour.
Mm-hmm.
And actually, I've been on a safari before in real life in one of the countries in Africa, so I've already known what that sounds like in real life. So too, yeah, it would work really well with animals. But that's all really good. And just a couple more questions for you. One
Sure.
more, and then one more really good question. So,
Okay.
do you have any? Do you just to make our audience a little bit less comfortable than normal? Do you have any unusual or scary hobbies that you don't usually tell people that maybe we wouldn't expect?
Scary, yes. I would say unusual, no. And that for many years, I've worked on attractions. I've always had interest, even before I got into the industry, of doing yard haunt displays at Halloween. So I I have quite a bit of experience in prop making and set decoration things, even though I'm not trained in any of those, just years of experience. I think my other hobbies are, fairly mundane and completely unrelated. I like fantasy football. I like playing poker with my friends. I'm getting into table gaming a lot before COVID shut all that down. So, strange and scary hobbies. I put all that into my work, and so although those watching movies or reading Stephen King novels or something, there's nothing particularly scary about reading books. Millions of people do the same thing. So I tend to pour that interest into my work, and it's not the most mainstream job to have, but it reflects my interest, and I know enough people that I know there's an audience for it. So the rest of my hobbies are unfortunately pretty boring by comparison, but mainstream certainly.
All right. And I always love to give my guests the opportunity to ask me only one question. You've been a great guest. You're extremely knowledgeable, and that was a lot of great information out there. If anyone's doing a research paper on this topic, that was a ton of knowledge you just gave me and gave my audience. So thanks so much for that. But if you could make me sweat and ask me only one question, what do you come on, really? I mean, I think a great content creator like you can come up with a pretty crazy question. I mean, what question do you really want to ask about me?
Well, boy, talk about being put on the spot. I let's see. I think as it relates to your interest in the purpose of this podcast, I would certainly be very interested to hear, not because it's about my show, but when you heard this episode, how effective was the environment setting for you as a sight impaired person? Does that work better for you? Is it harder to convince you of reality? And is a show, let's put it this way, is an episode like this, is it important to you that it attempts to build any reality? Are you simply there for the entertainment value of being told a story? Is it important for you to be in it?
So good. You know what? That was, I love, guys, I love that when a guest asks a perfect question, very thoughtful. That was perfect. Exactly.
I was worried it's like, enough about me. Now you tell me how you like me. I didn't want the question to be that, but that as creator of the show, that you offer a unique perspective that I would love to hear.
Sure. So it's so fascinating. As for me, it depends on my mood. I'm a pretty moody guy, right? So when I'm not podcasting, I've been teaching English online for 5 years, and I do a lot of talking all day. I've always loved to talk to people. That's how I got into the podcasting about a year ago. It really depends on my mood, Scott. Sometimes I want to listen to something that's crazy and unsettling, like The Cabinet, although I will tell you that actually I watch a lot more disturbing things on YouTube than that. So the part and the fact that interested me and held my interest was the beauty of the script and your just the way you painted the picture and the way you sent the message was, I think, really, really, really good. So speaking on behalf of the entire community, well, of course I can't, because I'm only one blind person. I think it's a really good thing to think about as a creator. Again, it depends on the person who's listening, right? But then it depends on the episode and kind of the flavor of the episode. Whereas if Laura had come back as sick as this is, I have a pretty messed up sense of humor. I'm a pretty disturbing person, actually. If you ever came back for episode 2, you would be pretty scared. If Laura had come back, I would have thought in my mind, that's kind of dull. That's kind of boring. That would be kind of a boring finish, right? If she came back. But the fact that she didn't come back, that kind of left me hanging. That kind of left some suspense in my mind's ear.
Mhm.
So I think it really depends on the flavor of the episode and the environment of the it just that depends on the episode. But you should definitely ask other blind people in your life if you ever get that chance, because it was a very thoughtful question, for sure. For sure. Yeah. So it all depends. Who knows? Mm-hmm.
And that's great. I love the use of your phrase, your mind's ear. It's like, well, that just really speaks home to me, even as a sighted person. It's like I completely understand. I believe what you mean by that, and the power of how you can perceive and create information and storytelling in your head. I think it's an amazingly powerful tool, and I think one of the, to raise the point you brought before of podcasting, is just as a communication medium, exchange of ideas. I watched several of your episodes. I didn't get to watch all of them, clearly, but
That is fine.
just a forum of hearing differing opinions, hearing differing sides of the same opinion. It's such a valuable tool, and I think it's more than the convenience and the technology of podcasting. It's how powerful the exchange of ideas and information and learning can be in to a mass audience that is using that tool to their own means, and how it affects them. As you said, it depends on each person. 10 people can hear the same episode of your show and come up with 10 different benefits from that all differ from each other, because it's hitting them in their individual senses of knowledge and reality. And I think it's one of the most amazing things that come out of this movement, and it exceeds far beyond just the technological ability to do it, is what people like you are creating with it versus just filling airtime. This is not a time waster. This is, you have a purpose for your show, and it comes across very readily. And the brilliance of what you're doing is the variety of people and opinions you have and topics you discuss on your show. It is not a show about one thing. It is a show about whatever interests you and whatever interests that guest. And getting to tap into that as an audience is fantastic. And I want to commend you for that.
And I want to thank you for that. You're very kind. It's incredibly kind of you to say that. And someone else in the community told me that, yeah, Aaron, having a podcast called Opinion is really good because it allows me to talk to the world. It allows me to have, I actually, speaking of Hollywood, I actually had an actress on the show just a couple days ago. I'm gonna blank on her. I'm gonna blank on her last name, so I won't tell you. I forget.
Okay.
I forget. It was one of the actresses who does a lot of commercials, like for candy and stuff like that. So I've had a lot of people. I've had her. I've had retired prison guard, right? I've had a model. I've had an athlete. I've had a lot of IT people, other YouTubers, other content creators.
Mm-hmm.
So you're so kind. I commend you. I appreciate, accept, and want more kind guests like you on this podcast, because there's, and the other thing about podcasting is everybody in the community is so supportive and so kind and so knowledgeable. It's so nice. It's not just like on, the big social media platforms where everyone's so cranky and negative and
right.
Oh my God. That's depressing even for me. And I'm a young person on that thing. I'm getting depressed just looking at it. I don't want to hear people. I don't want to hear other people's opinions. They're all negative. And one thing I'm going to do that you brought up, I'm definitely going to do it now that you gave me the idea. I'm going to post your episode, the podcast, onto a group on Facebook that is just for other blind people. There's about 10,000 people in the group. Wow. I'm going to give a little video, a little intro for it live on that group. And I'm going to say, I want to do an experiment with you guys. How do you all perceive and feel and hear this episode? Because I'm curious now. If I ask 10,000 people in a group that same question, what are all of the responses I'm going to get? I'm really fascinated by that. So I'm going to certainly do that. I'm just curious. I just want to see how others react to it.
I am too. I can't wait to read the results myself. I'll
tell you.
Oh, yes. And I think you hit on a point too that I don't want to pass by. Sure. You're right about podcasting in that you say it's a great community. I think part of the power and why it has become what it is that it is created from the community upward. It is not, dictated from one source that this is what we want you to enjoy. And the individuality of that and how a community builds around people who would like interest just beyond the ability to podcast. You raised the great issue of, let's say putting my episode out to that group and seeing what people think of it. It's interactive. It's welcoming people to respond to something, not here, absorb this piece of entertainment I have, and then go away, but come back when I sell you the next one. It isn't like that at all. It invites people to participate, and I think one of the reasons why it's so positive is people can then express their own opinions, but they also learn from other people, and it broadens people's minds. It broadens people's horizons of what is interesting, what is important, what is entertaining, and the ability to engage the audience to where, in the end, I know that they're hearing the show in their theater of the mind, and they're going to hear it different than the person next to them, because we all have different psychologies and brains. And it's a fascinating thing just to put out an idea in a group and then say, what do you think about this? And it's hugely educational and helpful to a content creator as well.
Sure. Yeah. And well, that is all of the questions. That is all. I think this was a really fascinating, incredibly fascinating episode for me. I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did, and I hope the listeners. Well, good. It's always nice when the guest truly appreciates, and you're so appreciative. I immensely appreciate that. So basically, that's all I have, guys. So not necessarily applicable, but it kind of is. So what if someone is in the audience here and they want to get in touch with you about anything? What if they are a voice actor? What if they want to do voice acting for you in the future? How would they go about contacting you? If you want, you can give yourself a plug if you want.
Sure. The fastest and easiest way would be to contact me through our website, which is dreadofnightradio.com. There is a contact form on the website. It's on the main menu. You can find it easily. And you can send me an email with any questions you have about the show. If you want to, anyone wants to pitch themselves as a voice actor. The more production that we get into, the more actors we're going to need to fill out these episodes, especially if it's an episode with a large cast. There's obviously a variety of sizes of roles. So just email me through dreadofnightradio.com, and I will personally read the emails, and I will answer any questions that I can. I will keep a list of actors who may want to join the cast and get your contact information. It will be a while before we produce the first season of episodes, but I will keep all that information handy, and I will use it to my best ability when we get into production on more episodes. So super easy.
Fantastic. Could not have said it better. Couldn't have asked for a better plug at the end of that. Well, Scott, I wish you the very best of health and the very best of success. I've subscribed to that thing on iTunes. You guys should do the same. Are you guys are you doing YouTube? Are you also going, well, I guess that kind of defeats the purpose in a sense, but do you also plan to do anything with YouTube while we're thinking of it, while it's on the tip of my tongue?
Yes. I know that you share your podcast both on YouTube and in audio form as well. And now that I've gotten this episode out and produced, and one of the goals I have is to make a YouTube video of the episode, and I will have rotating visuals to give you something to look at if that's what you're looking for. But it will contain the audio episode in its entirety, just because I want to find other ways to distribute this beyond just the podcasting audio circuit, as it were. So I definitely will do that, and I will also have plans to release a making of video going behind the scenes, the production in the studio of this episode.
Oh,
That
please. Yes,
will also
please.
go
Oh,
on.
I want to hear that. Okay, that. See, but then, on one hand, I promise you I'm going to watch it. But then on the other, I have to say you're killing me, because why would the magician tell the trick? Why do you want people to know how you make it though?
Well,
Yeah.
I agree. I understand what you're saying, and it will be, it will be offered in a section of, making of, that people can't automatically stumble into seeing behind the curtain, but it'll be easily accessible for those who do. And it's, a lot of the footage will be of our cast recording the roles in a studio. That, that doesn't really destroy any illusions, other than you now see the actor performing their lines that you've only heard so far.
People are fascinated, and that's why I think people love watching me, really like watching me on YouTube. I notice most of the people are watching my YouTube videos, I think, because they want to see my face. I think it's really odd, it's really silly, but I think when people hear voices and they don't see the face, they wonder, what does that face look like when they're making that sound or saying that line? I think they want to see the faces actually saying and reading through the script like that. Yeah.
They do, and especially in the YouTube era, we've become so accustomed to people recording their own content and sharing it that it's another way beyond just hearing your opinions on a topic with your guest on your show. Is you get to know that person a bit as well, and you connect with them visually, just hearing them, seeing their environment of what they're recording in or whatever. So it's completely a natural extension of where we're going with all of this, and I think eventually it will all merge. They'll become indistinguishable. You'll just have 11 different ways you can enjoy. You'll have a VR version of your podcast. In the future, you can just download the show in your head, and there's no the technology is only a delivery method. Is not the idea of the communication that you're creating, and people have trained themselves to enjoy meeting you virtually online, especially with COVID and having meetings on Zoom and people working from home. It's people enjoy making those connections, and I would have to go to great lengths to meet you in Maryland geographically, but I can sit here and talk to you for an hour live and get to know you very enjoyably through this. So it's an incredibly valuable tool, and I want to extend that aspect beyond the audio portion of Dread of Night, so that in video ways that are separate from the entertainment of the show, but included with it. And I think just the more the merrier. The more you can reach out and connect to people, the better.
Absolutely. So good. Well, I'll certainly be watching. I will certainly be watching that and listening to that making of. I'm of course fascinated by that. That's all going to be good. So we've been speaking this evening, or morning or afternoon or middle of the night, wherever you guys in the world are when you choose to play this, with Scott here from Dread of Night Radio Theater. Dread of Night Radio Theater. And I greatly appreciated recording this episode. Certainly enjoyed it. As I said, I wish you the very best of health. You personally, I wish the world very best of health. I wish the world, and I wish, by the way, that if you have any comments for me, you know how to do it. aaronsopinion6@gmail.com. Okay, don't worry, don't do it, because nobody emails me. Okay, why did I just say that? I don't know. But I hope that from wherever in the world you are, you always enjoy this podcast. And by the way, just a message from Aaron's Opinion. Please, please, please steer clear of Dante, any magician, and any magical cabinet. We have a very famous saying on this podcast, a very famous saying. It's very famous only because it's my opinion that it's very famous. I say, help one person today, help a million people tomorrow. Take care, everybody.